John Gotti, the Teflon Don, was not just a mafia boss, he embodied power, charisma, and violence in the streets of New York. A man who defied the system and became a legend, both in the headlines and in the shadows of the underworld. Today we dive into the life of this gangster who redefined the meaning of impunity and discover how he became one of the most feared and admired mafiosos in history. Get ready to meet the man behind the myth. This is the story of John Gotti. John Gotti's childhood is deeply connected to his family's origins, which played a crucial role in shaping his life and the path he would later follow. John Joseph Gotti was born on October 27, 1940, into an Italian-American family in the Bronx, New York. His parents, John Joseph Gotti Sr. and Filomena Fanny Gotti, were immigrants from Italy, originally from Naples. The Gotti family faced financial difficulties from the start, with John Gotti Sr. struggling to provide for the large family. John Gotti Sr. worked as a laborer and took on small manual jobs, but he never managed to achieve financial stability. This created frustrations and tensions at home. The instability in his work caused the family to move frequently, resulting in a household marked by economic hardship and constant changes in environment. Filomena, known as Fanny, played the role of a strict and devoted mother, always trying to maintain control over the children. But she struggled to cope with Gotti Sr.'s strong temper and the ongoing financial difficulties. This instability contributed to the emotional distance between John Gotti Jr. and his father, and was one of the factors that pushed him to the streets early on, in search of a different path. The image of a father struggling to survive financially, with no control over his own life, left a deep impression on Gotti, who vowed that he would never live under the same conditions. This fueled his early pursuit of respect and power, with the streets of his neighborhood quickly becoming his battlefield. Around the age of 10, Gotti began to further distance himself from his chaotic family life and immersed himself in the streets of Brooklyn, where his family had moved in search of better opportunities. However, the economic conditions did not improve, and Gotti, already dissatisfied with the reality at home, began to develop a fascination with the figures of power and influence in the neighborhood, who were often tied to organized crime. The Brooklyn of the 1950s was a haven for Italian immigrants and a hub of mafia activity, especially in neighborhoods like Ozone Park, where Gotti grew up. There, young people like him were exposed to the influence of gangs and crime from an early age. Gotti, rebellious and charismatic, soon began getting involved in petty crimes such as theft and street fights. School, which should have been a refuge or a chance to escape poverty, did not offer the kind of authority or recognition he sought. Gotti was frequently expelled for bad behavior and lack of discipline, eventually dropping out in the 8th grade at the age of 16. By this time, he had already become part of a group of young delinquents called the Fulton Rockaway Boys, who engaged in small criminal activities. These youth gangs not only provided a sense of belonging that he didn't find at home, but also offered a kind of training for life in organized crime. Gotti quickly developed a reputation for being fearless and brutal, traits that made him stand out within the group. It was also during this phase that Gotti suffered an accident that left physical scars. In one of his first attempts at theft, he and his friends tried to steal a cement mixer from a construction site, but Gotti ended up dropping the equipment on his feet, crushing his toes. The accident caused him to limp for the rest of his life. The association with gangs and involvement in illicit activities became increasingly central to Gotti's life. He began to learn the codes and hierarchy of the underworld, seeing mafia figures as examples of success, power, and respect, all things he and his family had never achieved. The young Gotti spent more and more time away from home, emotionally distancing himself from his family and diving deeply into a life of crime that was just beginning to take shape. John Gotti's early years of crime began in his adolescence, and his rapid rise in the underworld of organized crime reflected both his intelligence and his propensity for violence. In his youth, Gotti moved from petty street crimes in Brooklyn to becoming directly involved with gangs and eventually the Mafia. After dropping out of school at 16, Gotti was already an active member of the juvenile gang Fulton Rockaway Boys. a group of delinquents who committed thefts, robberies, and small-time burglaries. Although these crimes were low-level, they gave Gotti an introduction to the world of crime and a network of contacts that would prove useful in the coming years. During this time, he developed a reputation for his willingness to use physical force to resolve conflicts, quickly earning him respect among his peers. His early crimes included car theft and truck hijacking, which were common crimes on the streets of New York during the 1950s and 1960s. Brooklyn, where he operated, was a hub of mafia activity, and Gotti soon began working as a soldier in operations smuggling stolen goods. One of his first, more significant jobs was hijacking valuable cargo from trucks, transporting goods along the highways that cut through the city. The Mafia already controlled much of these activities, and it was in this context that Gotti began to stand out. During this period, Gotti met key figures in the world of crime, including Carmine Fatico, an important captain in the Gambino family, one of the 5 major crime families in New York. Fatico operated in Ozone Park, the same neighborhood where Gotti lived, and it was through his connections with Fatico and his smuggling operation that Gotti began to be noticed by the Mafia. In the 1960s, Gotti was recruited by Fatico and became involved in more sophisticated operations, such as extortion and illegal gambling. He mainly worked at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, Fatico's headquarters in Ozone Park, which served as a front for a range of illicit activities, such as loan sharking and trafficking stolen goods. In this position, Gotti gained access to the world of gambling and the Gambino family's network of influence. Gradually, he became directly involved in mafia activities, starting to carry out jobs that included extorting local businesses and collecting debts for the bosses. His violent behavior, cunning, and fierce loyalty to Fatico and the Gambinos made him a valuable asset. From an early age, Gotti demonstrated an ability to use intimidation in a calculated way, which led him to rise in the criminal family's hierarchy. However, the rapid rise in the underworld also brought problems. In 1968, Gotti was arrested for the first time for his involvement in a major truck theft at John F. Kennedy International Airport. He and his gang had stolen a load of cigarettes worth $50,000. This crime marked one of his first major arrests, and Gotti was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The experience in jail did not steer him away from crime. On the contrary, it strengthened his reputation as a tough man, capable of enduring hardship without betraying his partners. Upon leaving prison, Gotti resumed his criminal activities, gaining more notoriety and solidifying his position as a future leader within the Gambino family. He returned to the streets determined to rise even further in the hierarchy, with a clear vision of how power and respect in the mafia world were earned through violence, loyalty, and manipulation. Gotti began managing activities such as extortion, loan sharking, trafficking in stolen goods, and illegal gambling, proving to be a reliable enforcer for the family. It was during this phase that he became involved in one of his first major murders, earning respect and notoriety. In the late 1960s, Gotti was tasked with killing James McBratney, a gangster who had kidnapped and murdered a member of the Gambino family. By successfully carrying out McBratney's execution in 1973, Gotti gained prestige within the organization, demonstrating his willingness to kill and his skill in executing contracts with precision. It was also during this time that Gotti began to develop a close relationship with Agnello Della Croce, the then underboss of the Gambino family. Della Croce was an imposing figure in the underworld, with vast experience and a reputation as one of the most feared mobsters in New York. He became a mentor to Gotti, teaching him the nuances of mafia politics and the code of loyalty and respect that governed the crime families. The head of the Gambino family at the time, Carlo Gambino, recognized Gotti's potential, but it was Agnello Della Croce who effectively took him under his wing, entrusting him with increasingly significant responsibilities. Gotti became a key figure in the family's operations, especially after Carmine Fatico was convicted and imprisoned. With Fatico's incarceration, Gotti was tasked with managing the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, expanding his influence over Ozone Park, and solidifying his role as the de facto leader in that territory. However, the 1970s also brought new challenges. In 1974, Gotti was arrested again, this time for his involvement in the murder of McBratney. He was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison, but was released in 1977 after serving only 2 years. Upon his release, his position within the Gambino family was even stronger, as he had served his sentences without betraying anyone, earning even more respect in the underworld. The major turning point in John Gotti's career came in 1980, when his 12-year-old son, Frank Gotti, was struck and killed by a neighbor, John Favara. Favara, who claimed it was an accident, was not charged with any crime but disappeared months later. Although Favara's death was never formally attributed to Gotti, his disappearance solidified Gotti's image as someone who, even in personal matters, acted with impunity and decisiveness. This personal event demonstrated to the criminal world that Gotti was willing to protect his family and honor at any cost, further strengthening his aura of invincibility. With Carlo Gambino's death in 1976, the new boss, Paul Castellano, took command of the family. Castellano, however, had a more discreet leadership style focused on legitimate business, which created discontent among figures like Gotti, who felt sidelined. Tensions between Castellano and the more traditional wing of the Mafia, led by Della Croce and his protégés, including Gotti, began to rise. Although Della Croce kept Gotti in check, preventing a direct confrontation with Castellano, everything changed in 1985 when Della Croce died of cancer. With Della Croce's death, Gotti felt it was time to act. He saw Paul Castellano as a weak and distant leader who had alienated much of the family by prioritizing business over the traditional loyalty of the Mafia. Gotti began orchestrating a plan to overthrow Castellano and take control of the Gambino family. On December 16, 1985, Paul Castellano was gunned down in front of Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan in an attack coordinated by Gotti and his closest allies.
He died on an empty stomach. And because it happened that way, the theory is the biggest Mafia rub-out of the decade took place with considerable help from inside the dead mobster's family. 6 shell casings were on the pavement of East 46th Street, right next to...
After Castellano's death, John Gotti took command of the Gambino family, which at the time was the most powerful of the 5 organized crime families in New York. His rise to power was marked by a bold and public leadership style. Unlike many Mafia bosses who preferred to maintain a low profile, Gotti embraced the media spotlight, earning the nickname Teflon Don for escaping multiple criminal charges. His charisma, combined with his brutality and skill in manipulating the justice system, solidified his position as one of the most notorious and feared Mafia bosses in United States history, known as the Teflon Don, a man upon whom charges simply did not stick. Gotti reorganized the hierarchy within the Gambino family. He kept his close allies in positions of power, including his right-hand man, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, who was appointed underboss. Gotti knew that loyalty was crucial in the world of organized crime, and he was known for generously rewarding those who supported him unconditionally. Under his leadership, the Gambino family continued to dominate various illicit activities, such as extortion, loan sharking, drug trafficking, and illegal gambling. They also wielded significant control over unions and sectors of the construction industry, using intimidation and political influence to secure lucrative contracts. Gotti liked to directly oversee many of these operations, staying involved in important decisions and demanding absolute loyalty from his subordinates. He maintained the image of a powerful man, accessible to his soldiers, but he was also uncompromising when it came to betrayal or disobedience. While his public life as a mob boss drew attention, Gotti faced a growing enemy, the FBI. For years, law enforcement and the government had been trying to take down New York's Mafia, but Gotti seemed invincible. He used a combination of bribes and intimidation to keep witnesses and jurors silent or frightened. Additionally, he had skilled lawyers like Bruce Cutler who managed to dismantle the charges against him in court. For example, in 1986, Gotti was tried on charges of extortion and conspiracy related to illegal gambling. The trial was widely covered by the media, but Gotti was acquitted. It is believed that he managed to bribe members of the jury. His ability to evade justice reinforced his untouchable image, further cementing his legend as the Teflon Don. However, the constant media attention and his ostentatious lifestyle began to create increasing pressure both inside and outside the Mafia. Many traditional mobsters criticized Gotti for being overly visible and attracting unnecessary attention to the Mafia's operations, which had always thrived in the shadows. Although Gotti was respected and feared, his leadership was not without internal conflicts. One of the greatest challenges he faced came from within his own organization. Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, his underboss, began to resent the fact that Gotti was receiving all the media attention and taking credit for many of the crimes and operations in which Gravano had played a crucial role. These internal tensions only grew over time, especially as federal authorities tightened their grip. The FBI had finally found a way to infiltrate Gotti's inner circle by installing wiretaps at the Ravenite Social Club, his headquarters in Little Italy. Through these wiretaps, the government obtained incriminating conversations between Gotti and his associates, including discussions about murders and other illicit activities. In December 1990, Gotti was arrested along with Gravano and other key members of the Gambino family. The government was prepared to use the recordings to charge Gotti with multiple crimes, including the murder of Paul Castellano. However, the real turning point came when Gravano, feeling that he might be sacrificed to save Gotti, decided to cooperate with the government. Gravano became the biggest informant in Mafia history, providing detailed evidence about the Gambino organization and testifying against Gotti in court. With Gravano's testimony and the FBI recordings, Gotti was finally defeated. In 1992, he was convicted of multiple crimes, including murder, conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and obstruction of justice. His conviction was a landmark victory in the government's fight against organized crime. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Unlike his time as a boss, when he ruled the Gambino empire with confidence and charisma, Gotti spent his final years in prison in relative obscurity. In 2002, he died of throat cancer at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. Even behind bars, his influence persisted for a time, and he remained a legendary figure both inside and outside the world of crime. Gotti's legacy is complex. To many, he symbolized the rise and fall of the Italian Mafia in the United States. His ascent to power represented the last great moment of a Mafia boss who could operate with a certain degree of impunity, openly defying government authority. However, his public leadership style, combined with the betrayal of his allies, marked the beginning of the end for the Mafia as a dominant force in the American underworld. Gotti also left a cultural legacy, frequently portrayed in films, TV series, and books. His life and leadership style served as inspiration for many fictional characters in cinema, such as the famous Tony Soprano from the Soprano series. Even in death, John Gotti remained a fascinating figure in the history of organized crime in the United States. Subscribe to the channel and check out the recommended videos. See you next time.